are you? And where are you going? What do you want?
Hello and welcome to Trust and Estates Weekly. I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel, and I'm here every Monday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. So for those of you who've seen the show before, you're saying, wait, you're dressed differently this morning. And the answer is yes, because just a minute and 15 seconds before showtime, I was in a hearing in Los Angeles Superior Court. And there was, first of all, I was taught you wear a suit when you go to court. So there was not time to change, but and I had to turn down a call by my lawyer, who I think wants to talk about what happened, and I'll have to talk to him after the show. So this is the life of a professional fiduciary sometimes, right? Lots and lots of fun. It was an interesting court hearing. I'll tell you a little bit about it to show you how complex these situations can get. So a man died. He purportedly created a will and a trust. Okay. He appointed his business partner as the executor of his will. However, the will was not witnessed, or at least there's no signatures by witnesses. And so there is a will contest. The presumption, since the original will does not exist, there's only a copy. And at best, the copy was the original will was maybe signed by the decedent, but all we have is a copy. There's not even lines where witnesses could have signed the will. So the business partner is trying to get the will upheld so that he can control any part of the estate that is outside of a trust. And there's some question as to whether the trust is valid as well. All of this is set against a situation where the decedent has a minor child who appears to be completely disinherited if, in fact, the will is valid and the trust is valid. Right? And so, as you can imagine, there are people who are interested in making sure that the child is not disinherited wrongly. And there are other people who are interested in getting their hands on the money. And the judge is in the middle, trying to do the right thing. And as lawyers are wont to do, they are representing their clients to the exclusion of what may otherwise seem to be fair. So, and the estate, including evidently the property that may or may not be in the trust, is worth, I've heard figures anywhere from $0 to $100 million. And you think that Dallas was an exciting show. Okay. That's what goes on in probate sometimes. And this is why it is so important to have an estate plan, that have it be properly drawn up, to have there be no ambiguity as to who is to represent you. And I would add that, to be very clear about whether the people you think should be representing you once you've died really are of the kind of reputation that you can count on them to fulfill your wishes rather than be self-serving. And so, what's happening in this case is there's a lot of time has been, let's see, this has been going on, I'll tell you real quickly. Yeah, this has been going on already for the better part of a year. And the court just at this hearing appointed a special administrator for a limited period of time, roughly about 2.5 months, just to make sure that the daughter is not inadvertently disinherited because someone else has control of assets that shouldn't. So it's a very, very difficult case, one that potentially could result in a great deal of litigation. On the other hand, it could be something that's very simple. The purported witnesses, oral witnesses to the will, could lack any kind of credibility, and therefore the will would be found to be incurably defective and have no bearing. And then it would be a matter of what are the terms of the trust and who is going to who's going to be appointed as the trustee under the trust, to make sure that all the beneficiaries of the trust are properly attended to. Or it could be the trust is also determined to be invalid, and now there is an intestate succession, where possibly there are zero assets. So there you go. That is not the subject for today's show. However, on today's show, I want to talk about something called an ethical will. And maybe what I just explained to you is a good introduction to the concept of an ethical will. And this is something, by the way, that I first heard about, more than 40 years ago when I was a Sunday school teacher. And the idea was raised that there are other things besides money that we oftentimes feel are important, maybe even more important than money, that we want to leave as a legacy to our heirs, whether it's family members, friends, etc. And that is the purpose of an ethical will. Now, I would venture to say that very, very few estate planning attorneys ever address the concept of an ethical will, and I think that's a shame. While, as I mentioned a moment ago, I was introduced to this concept as a Sunday school teacher, so obviously in a religious school context. I taught at a Jewish Sunday school. One doesn't have to be religious or religious in any traditional sense of the word in order to have a desire to pass along things of value, that non-monetary things of value, to one's family, one's heirs, etc. And so that's why I'm going to take up this subject. I'm going to a little bit put on my rabbi hat today, in addition to my professional fiduciary hat, and talk about the sort of what, why, how of ethical wills, so that if you are working with an estate planning attorney who hasn't raised the idea of creating an ethical will, you can, if you think it's something that you want to be part of your estate plan. So, first of all, let's talk about what is an ethical will. So, an ethical will, it's a non-legal document in which someone shares their values, their life lessons, even personal stories, and hopes for future generations. So, unlike a traditional will that passes down money and property, an ethical will passes down meaning, wisdom, and legacy, non-monetary legacy. I'll take a moment here. Legacy has a specific legal meaning in probate. A legacy is the non-real property left to the heirs of an estate. Okay, so that's where the term legatee comes from. Someone is a legatee of an estate when they are an heir to what's known as personal property, non-real personal property. So, but when I use this term legacy in the context of an ethical will, I'm using it in a non-legal sense, and it kind of a broad meaning, legacy as in a memory of our lives, the lessons, the meaning, the wisdom that we want to pass to the next generation. So you will sometimes hear an ethical will referred to as a legacy letter. It's just another name for it. I like the term ethical will. It seems to me to be a more impactful term, but a legacy letter means the same thing. Now, it is not binding on your personal representative or any of your heirs. It's not that kind of document. At least it's not legally binding. However, it is morally binding to the extent that you say in your ethical will, I put you under moral obligation to follow the terms of this will. Now, of course, a court will not enforce a moral obligation. It has no standing to do so. However, for some of us at least, a moral obligation may trump a legal obligation, depending on the context. And I do think it's a shame that there are some people, maybe many people in our society, who would just discard the notion of a moral obligation on its face, especially in the context of someone who has died and has very profound wishes about how things should be handled post-death. So it's not legally binding, but it may be, and it can be, I think, be set up to be morally binding. Okay, typically it's set up to address an entire family or an entire group of people, family, friends, but it can be like a regular will. It can be set up to address specific individuals. And by the way, it needn't be one or the other. It can be a situation where part of the ethical will addresses everyone, and then there are subparts to address individuals, maybe a child or a grandchild or a sibling or or a particular friend. So there is no set format in that sense, but it's really what your preference would be. And finally, it captures the why behind your decisions, not just the what. So for example, let's say that for particular reasons you have decided to disinherit somebody. Okay, in your will, okay, or for that matter, in a trust. Okay, and by the way, you can do an ethical will even though you have a trust. Okay, but let's say in whatever instrument you decided to disinherit somebody. Okay, now that person is likely to be upset, maybe angry. Maybe that person feels that other siblings or other heirs sort of had an undue influence on you in disinheriting them, and it could cause acrimony between the disinherited individual and the beneficiaries or heirs of your estate. Okay, and you may not think that's a good thing. You may not want your beneficiaries and heirs to be subject to blame by the person you have chosen to disinherit. So an ethical will is an excellent place for you to explain to that disinherited individual why that person was disinherited. Okay, and you can state plainly, I made this decision. It has nothing to do with your siblings or other people who are benefiting under my will or my trust. Okay? Now, of course, there's no way you can force the person to believe what you're saying. However, from your beneficiary's standpoint, they may appreciate that in an ethical will, you absolve them of responsibility so that should they be attacked by, by the disinherited individual, they can have a clear conscience with respect to why you took this step and any obligation they might have to potentially undo it by sharing what they're receiving with the person who was disinherited. Okay, so the why behind decisions oftentimes is a very good thing for someone to explain in order to avoid conflict after their death. So that's what an ethical will is. Okay, let's talk now about why they are important. So as hopefully will be the case, right? When we shuffle off this mortal coil, as Shakespeare says, we will leave behind some people who are saddened, grieved, emotionally impacted by our death, and it can be a source of solace that we provide them with some emotional and moral guidance during this time of grieving, that we thought enough about what they would be going through after we're gone, that we took the steps to do that. So I would say one of the strongest reasons for creating an ethical will is to provide that emotional support and moral guidance to the heirs and beneficiaries of your estate. So that's number one. Number two, I mentioned this before, it's to help family members understand the intent behind financial decisions. So this is maybe a broader than just capturing the why per se. Okay, it's here's why I'm doing, or here's my intent behind financial decisions. So especially you, my personal representative, you can make decisions knowing my broad intent behind my various estate, but behind my estate plan, right? A why behind a decision might apply to an individual. The overall intent behind your estate plan will give your personal representative and your beneficiaries a more global sense of how you approached your estate plan and why financial decisions broadly were made the way they were. Okay, next, an ethical will help you preserve family history, traditions, and your personal philosophy. Okay, let's say, for example, that part of your personal philosophy is that animals be treated with decency. Okay, so not everybody believes that. Okay, and some people feel it's patently ridiculous to spend money on health care for a pet, for example. Well, I mean, that was a not uncommon belief 100 years ago. We have a different approach to that now, generally speaking, that animals shouldn't suffer. But the way we go about doing our best to prevent animals from suffering could be anything from seeing to it that they have proper veterinary care, maybe even somewhat extraordinary veterinary care, surgery, etc., so that they can live a healthy life, to euthanizing an animal that is suffering so that the animal is not suffering anymore. Well, you may not want your pet to be euthanized if it, gets sick. Okay, you may feel like you want your philosophy that animals should be treated decently to be carried on, so long as your estate is active, in which case it would be within your personal representative's purview to see to it that a pet was properly was cared for properly, and afterwards, and that it was part of the personal representative's duty to make sure that whoever adopted that pet had that same philosophy. Okay, so these are the kinds of things that you can do in an ethical will that it's more difficult to accomplish them through your legal estate planning documents. Now, you say, well, in my trust, can't I put a clause in my trust requiring that that my trustee see to it that whoever is charged with taking care of my pet after my death will not euthanize my pet? Well, you can do that, but and I'm not giving legal advice here, of course, but I'm just talking in a general way. Uh, Once we start putting those kinds of very specific requirements in our trust, we can hamper our trustee's ability to effectively administrate it. As well, we could put the trustee in a position where he would have to get a court involved if he needed to do something that violated such a provision, but did make sense in the context of truly truly complying with your wishes. So putting an animal in the care of someone who won't euthanize it, but what if the animal is so critically sick that all it can look forward to is months, if not years, of true suffering, with no help of ever recovering? Is that really what you want for your pet? And so then, well, I'll add a clause to the clause saying that, what I'm saying? It goes on and on and on. It's very difficult to put, and problematic as well, to put into a legal document those kinds of very specific instructions. However, they can be put in an ethical will, and hopefully the person you've chosen as your personal representative is the kind of individual who will look at such a document, take it very seriously, and make it part of his approach to the administration of your estate. Okay, let's take a break. When life brings unexpected changes, managing inherited property shouldn't add to your stress. Magnum Properties specializes in probate and trust real estate management. We handle the complexities while you focus on what matters most. From property maintenance to tenant relations, from legal compliance to maximizing value, we're your trusted partner through every step. Magnum Properties, Inc., turning property challenges into peace of mind. Call us today at 213-264-4396 or visit magnumprops.com. So this is Trust and Estates Weekly, and I'm your host, Kevin Bemmel. And I'm talking about ethical wills. Okay, this is a non-legally binding document that I would encourage you to consider as part of your overall estate plan. So I talked about what they are, why they're important. Now let's look at, there's a historical and cultural background to ethical wills. As I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I first learned about them as a Sunday school teacher at a synagogue. And in fact, the concept of an ethical will is rooted in Jewish tradition going back really millennia, but certainly several hundred years. But there are versions of them that exist in other cultures. They may not go by the same name, but the idea of creating a document to transmit your values, your ideals, your philosophy, your history, traditions to succeeding generations, that is something that I think resonates with lots of cultures and lots of religions. So within that context, if you were to, do research on ethical wills, you would find that among ancient texts in multiple traditions, you would find ethical instructions for decedents. Okay, so again, they may not be given the formal name ethical will or legacy letter or anything like that, but this concept of passing down these the non-financial part of one's legacy, you would definitely find throughout human history. In medieval Europe, they were often written by parents to guide children in faith and daily life. And in modern times, I think they are being somewhat rediscovered as part of holistic estate planning. Now, again, your estate planning attorney may not have heard of them, or it may not be on his radar. But if you think it's something of value, you can always raise it and get his assistance. Or it may be something that if you follow a particular religious tradition, that you meet with the clergy of your house of worship and work with them to create an ethical will that you then submit to your attorney to be made part of your overall estate plan. And there's lots of ways to convey your ideas and your thoughts in an ethical will. It could be through storytelling, could be through proverbs, it could be through blessings. All of these can serve as parts of or the ethical will in toto. For example, you may have a particular poem that you find deeply meaningful in the way it aspires to guide your life. And I know when I turned 13 and I had my bar mitzvah, my mother read to me a poem by Rudyard Kipling called "If." And she's still alive, right? Lo, this almost 80 years later. In many ways, that poem, which you can't see it, but it's posted on the partition behind me, that poem has been a guiding document for me in understanding the man that my mother wished me to become, right? And so there's again many ways that ethical wills can be crafted to convey your message in different ways. And I would add, by the way, that a blessing or a poem may be a more powerful way to convey your message than simple prose or just the writing of instructions. And indeed, again, it doesn't mean there's nothing that says it has to be one or the other. You can do both. You could say, I hope that my estate, or I'm saying, I hope that my grandson, Kevin, just to use a name, I hope he will guide his life according to the ideals expressed in Rudyard Kipling's poem "If," and then you have the text of the poem, so it's read to your grandchild or something like that, right? So there's lots of ways that these can be done. So that having been said, so what are the forms that ethical wills can take? Well, by its alternate term, legacy letter, it can take the form of a letter. Dear my heirs and beneficiaries, or dear, and you name all the people to whom it's addressed. Or maybe you do, maybe it's only addressed to one individual. However you set that up, it can be written as a letter. It can be written as an essay, right? Like we did in junior high school and afterwards, right? Those are the way that historically they were done. Okay. However, these days, especially with the ease by which we can, use video and audio, right? We all have, a superb, video camera available to us with our smartphones, so we can do a video or an audio recording. Okay, and it can be played at the reading of a will. Although these days I don't think they do formal readings of a will, but you can give your personal representative the responsibility for distributing your ethical will audio recording or video whoever the group of people is to whom it needs to be distributed, or to whom you want it distributed. Okay, so that's another way of creating an ethical will. Another way is to create a scrapbook or artwork or even multimedia projects, again, to express what your philosophies, your ideas are. So let's take an example where you have a particular love for the out of doors, and you feel it's important for people to conserve the natural environment. So maybe you'll take a hike, and during the hike, you'll take some videos of different things that you find to be particularly moving, or particularly good examples of why you find nature to be worthy of being preserved. Maybe you get a picture of a deer running through a forest, or a picture of a hawk, just sort of the way they do, kind of, they're not soaring, they're hardly moving, they just sort of, with their wings in the wind, they hover over a particular location. In many ways a truly awesome sight, and that's probably one of the few times you've ever heard me use that word in any of my shows. So you could take videos and intersperse them with dialogue, or you could write an essay, and at different points in the essay have video portions or audio portions inset into it. All of that can be done these days. You could set up a website, for that matter, if you really wanted to do something involved, right? So all of those are ways that you can consider creating your ethical will. And these days, all kinds of hybrid versions can be created. And then, you may need to, I shouldn't say you may need to, I would recommend that you have something in your estate plan that explains just briefly what your ethical will is, where it can be found, to whom it is addressed, and how you want it delivered to those people, right? And that should be part of your overall estate plan. So again, these days, maybe not so common to have a notebook with all the plan documents in it, at least not a real world notebook. Maybe you have a virtual notebook. It's actually a file, a computer file, but there should be a document in there somewhere that talks about the existence of an ethical will, and explains, again, how to access it, etc. Okay, so while you may choose to create an ethical will with the assistance of clergy, or someone with whom you entrust this creation of your non-monetary legacy, you are going to want to have your estate planning attorney knowledgeable about it, so that it can fulfill its purpose as part of your overall estate plan. Okay, next. So when should you create an ethical will? So I would say that just like it's prudent to create your estate plan when you're young, knowing that over the coming years you'll have to revise it, I would suggest you do the same thing with an ethical will. You needn't wait until death or infirmity is imminent to take the time to do it. And I would rather suggest that at that point, you may be in the least good position to create such a document. And it probably, or I shouldn't say probably, it may not be as effective as if you had initially created it, maybe when you, I don't know, first got married or first had children or something like that, where over the succeeding years, you can watch how your ideas maybe change or maybe how they don't change, how your interaction with various family members has grown, matured, or atrophied. All of these can add depth to an ethical will that can only come through the passage of time and, in essence, the tracking of your own maturity. Okay, so again, my original recommendation on this is write your first ethical will as soon as you start climbing into the estate planning process. Okay, and by the way, maybe it's the first document in your estate plan that you create, and that's what gives you the impetus to follow through on the monetary part of your estate plan. Okay, maybe you're not someone who particularly cares about money. And by the way, it's not only people who don't have a lot of money who don't particularly care about money. Lots of people don't find money to be the most powerful force in their lives. And so that's, I think, one of the reasons why they neglect to do an estate plan. It's just not that a monetary estate plan in this context. It's just not that important to them because money is not the focus of their life. They kind of assume that it's not the focus of other people's lives, right? And unfortunately, that may not be a valid assumption with respect to our potential heirs and beneficiaries. And so doing our ethical will first can help us get in touch of where those potential conflicts may lie as we seek to set down on paper our values, our philosophies, our hopes for future generations. We may come to terms with the fact that we do know that succeeding generations don't share our outlook and our values. And because of that, and in pursuance of those values, it becomes more important to complete the monetary portion of our estate plan than we otherwise might have thought it would have been. Okay, so get started on your ethical will as soon as possible. And it can be a part of a larger legacy project. So I know my mother, for example, over the last few years, she's been going through all of her stuff. She's given loads of pictures to my older sister, Marla. She's given away some books, 2 or 3 of which have been on her bookshelf since I was a kid. And I've always, frankly, admired those books. They're beautiful because they're so old. They've just always, I've found them very attractive. And to my surprise, really, she gave me those books, I think it was about a year ago. I was very, very pleased to receive them, not just because they're so beautiful, but because it's an expression of love from my mother, and in recognition that she understands this part of me, this bibliophile part of me that I think is one of the traits that we share. So again, an ethical will can be part of an overall legacy project, and it might motivate you to start dealing with all of the stuff that we so often accumulate through life. Start passing it to future generations now, especially if we're not using it, right? I mean, maybe you have china, silverware that you just don't use anymore for whatever reason. I know someone who's been on my show, Hillary Cooper. She talks about how younger generations don't want it. I'm not so sure I agree with that. I was very happy to get 2 or 3 sets of silverware, actual silverware, that my father's mother, my paternal grandmother, in Yiddish she's called my Bobby, had and used. I probably ate using this silverware as a child. I don't remember doing so, but I probably did. And so to have them as a memory of my Bulby is very meaningful to me, and I use it for. I have one set that I use for. Well, there's two sets that were very small that I use for just everyday meals, and then I have another set that I use for the Sabbath. And it's a way to remember her, to connect with her, the memories I had about eating, kosher meals in her home and that sort of thing. So again, an ethical will can be part of this larger legacy project, maybe even the writing of a memoir. Okay. And then once you've gotten started on it, you can update it throughout your life as your values and perspectives evolve, as your philosophy maybe changes, right? That is the nature of human existence. Okay. And you can also bring to it milestone events, weddings, births, anniversaries. So let's say when you write your initial ethical will, maybe it's a time when you get married and then you have a child, right? So now maybe you're going to change, you're going to update your ethical will in light of that child. Okay. And then the years go by and now that child gets married and has a child. And so your ethical will can grow and become a truly broad familial philosophy document that excuse me, if you tried to sit down and write in one or two sittings or even a week's worth of sittings, would not have the richness and depth that it would have if you've written it over years and decades. And finally, it can take special significance when you're facing illness or even end of life planning. So, again, it's going back to what I said at the beginning of this topic. Writing it when your infirmity or death is imminent is probably the least good time to write an ethical will. Your ability to do so may be impaired by your growing infirmity. Thoughts of your impending death may cloud what you otherwise would want to say to your family and heirs. And so the sooner you get started on it, the better. Okay, let's take another break. Probate and Trust TV, your curated source for the most useful and insightful content on estate planning and trust and probate administration, featuring standout professionals like Bill Gross, Paul Brabelet, James Cunningham, and yours truly. Whether you're a lawyer, accountant, real estate professional, or working on your own succession plan, this channel helps you quickly find the clearest, most practical content YouTube has to offer. Subscribe now to Probate and Trust TV. Spend more time learning, less time searching. Okay, I'm Kevin Bemmel, and this is Trusts and Estates Weekly, and I'm talking about ethical wills. So, been through several points on them, and have just a few more thoughts before I wrap up the show. So, if you are a lawyer or an advisor, okay, and you want to encourage your clients to write an ethical will, I should say create an ethical will, right? It may be a little bit uncomfortable talking to them about something that is not solidly in the legal realm because it's not a legal document. Okay, and I would encourage you to look at your role as part of the estate planning team in a broad way. So just because something isn't legally binding doesn't mean that it has no efficacy with respect to the administration of an estate and the ability of your client to have an impact on his family before and after his death. And so in that context, you're raising the issue of the creation of an ethical will is really just part of your duty as a trusted advisor. And it really is in that context that I would recommend you talk to your clients. So you can say to them, look, it's a way of connecting the head with the heart, right? What I'm able to do for you from a legal standpoint, it's all up here. The divvying up of your, your assets, your brokerage account and your real estate or whatever it is, right? But that's not going to speak to what's in here, your essence as a human being. And you can even say, look, I'm not clergy. Okay, I can say that, but most of you probably can, right? I'm not clergy, but I do recognize, and I've seen so often how the heart gets left out of the decisions that your personal representative may make, how your heirs view what's happened, and I think that that's a shame. And so I bring this to your attention to in the interest of making sure that I'm being as comprehensive as possible in helping you create your estate plan. And I think even if a client says, I appreciate, I'm not going to do one, they're going to appreciate that you brought it to their attention. And by the way, you've planted a seed. So while they may not find it a worthwhile thing to do at the time you initially raise it, maybe in some future meeting, because an estate plan, as you know, needs to be periodically reviewed and potentially updated. So maybe farther down the road, the client will just say, hey, I remember you mentioning that ethical will, I think it was called. I'd like to talk to you about that again. I know I rejected it when last we spoke, but I think maybe I need to reconsider it. Okay. And so just that alone will be valuable for your clients. So one way to sort of introduce the issue of an ethical will, well, introduce is the wrong term. One way to help a client who has expressed a potential interest in writing an ethical will is to recommend discussing it in a family meeting so that your client can get a sense of just what kind of impact such a document would have on your client's estate plan. Okay. It is a good idea, just as a general matter, to socialize an estate plan with family members, with beneficiaries or potential beneficiaries, right? And so an ethical will can be part of that same discussion. So you know once you've raised the issue, and to the extent that your client has expressed interest, if not commitment, to creating an ethical will, now you have an opportunity that as you go through specific monetary issues, so for example, maybe the client has certain philanthropic or charitable goals for his estate, so those in particular benefit from an ethical will, because charitable or philanthropic giving is as much a matter of the heart as it is a matter of the head. And especially for family members who may resent a large bequest to a charity, or the setting up of some sort of charitable trust that's coming at what they perceive as their expense, because now there's less money coming to them. So to have a sense of your life philosophy as contained in an ethical will can help them understand why you've taken this step. And so for you lawyers and advisors of people creating estate plans, this can help you better serve your clients. Okay. And as a professional, you can offer prompts, you can offer templates. You may know someone off the top of my head. I don't. I and I maybe I, now that in retrospect I should have researched this before the show. There may be professionals out there that help people write uh, ethical wills. Certainly, you can refer them to their clergyman if you know you have a sense that they do have someone, a priest, a minister, a rabbi, an imam that you know is to whom they or with whom they know and interact, especially on a regular basis. Okay, all right. So that's I think how lawyers and advisors can introduce the concept of an ethical will. So just a couple of sort of wrap up thoughts. So while your estate plan primarily benefits your families or your beneficiaries, right? It doesn't necessarily build the kind of strong bonds that you might wish to leave behind after you're gone. And so to the extent that you want to leave a lasting testament to your desire for strong familial bonds, an ethical will is an excellent way of doing that. It can create stronger bonds between the generations by showing them that the administration of an estate is not a purely financial function, but it is part of the generational transfer that includes a sense of family history, that includes the continuity of philosophy, but among or from generation to generation. So that's I think that's very important. Another way that it can benefit your family and your friends as well is to help younger heirs really appreciate the sacrifices that may have been made that allows them to receive whatever it is they're receiving, even if it's not that much. They didn't work for it. This is something they're getting, you know, by an accident of birth. But to the extent that they're getting it, you worked for it. And it's much more valuable for a young person to receive something knowing the true value behind it rather than just this sparse monetary number attached to it. So, to the extent that there were familial sacrifices made, that there were certain values that were upheld that allowed them to receive this inheritance, that's very, very powerful and can help them better understand their place, not just in history broadly written, but their place in the family itself. And finally, I think that it will provide them with some comfort. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the show. Hopefully, when we leave this earth, people are grieving. And so I think as the elders of our families, we have an obligation to do our best to provide them with some comfort and a sense of continuity and a contextualization of what it means for a beloved relative to die. And we are much better able to do that than our younger relatives. We're much better able to do it than clergy oftentimes because we know the specifics of our family. We know the individual attitudes, character of our family members, and we can address them on a loving, individualistic level in a way that clergy cannot. And I will tell you this from experience. Look, I've been in lots of situations where I was called upon to offer solace in the face of grief. But the fact of the matter is, in so many of those, I hardly knew the people, if at all. I might have met them that day. And so a lot of the things that I can say are or were frankly platitudes. I meant them as sincerely as I could, but I wouldn't even begin to categorize them as the kind of solace that they could have gotten from the person who had died. Okay, so all of those are ways that an ethical will can benefit your family. Okay, finally, just some practical tips for creating an ethical will. And number one, you really want to strive for authenticity. Perfection is not the goal here at all, but the giving of a part of yourself in this sense of a part of your emotional and spiritual self. That's what's most important. The writing doesn't need to be perfect. You know me, I'm a grammarian, but that's not what's important in the creation of an ethical will. It's the meaning that you put behind it, and how deeply it reflects who you truly are. That's most important. Uh, in terms of getting started, facing that blank sheet of paper, whether you're going to write a legacy letter or whether it's going to be more of kind of a script that becomes an audio or video project, we all face that blank paper. It can be very daunting. So a good way to start out is to just start writing down a story that you think will perhaps provide solace to your family members after you're gone, and then work from there, rather than starting with something like maybe an expression of your values that's potentially more weighty and harder to convey. Okay. And then, as I've said already, revisit it and update it periodically. I, it's hard to say what the periodicity should be, but not unlike an estate plan, a monetary estate plan, anytime there's a significant change in your family, a birth, God forbid, a death, a marriage, uh, those are absolutely proper times to review your estate plan and to review an ethical will. Okay. Beyond that, maybe, I don't know, every 2 years, every 4 years, something like that, every 5 years, and it could be more often. It's really at your discretion. And finally, and I think this is most important, to write a truly effective ethical will, don't hesitate to express your vulnerability. Okay. You may be sad at the thought that people are going to read this at a time when you're gone, and that you'll be separated from them. Don't hesitate to let them know that while you hope they will take this ethical will to heart, you're saddened by the fact that you're no longer with them, that they're reading this now as kind of the final gesture of your love and connection to them. Okay, those are, to express that kind of vulnerability will give greater impact to your ethical will. So again, I can't encourage you enough to consider creating an ethical will. Make it part of your estate plan, not only for your own benefit, but for the benefit of your family, your beneficiaries, etc. So thank you very much for joining me today, especially live viewers. Always a treat. If you have any questions, comments, criticism, love to hear them. My links to social media will be in the show notes. And if you found this episode interesting, valuable, useful, and you think, and you know someone that might benefit from it, I sure would appreciate you passing it along to them. I'd love to have the opportunity to gain them as a viewer or even a subscriber. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed, please consider going to my YouTube channel and subscribing there. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. is my show, Business Lessons from the Military. Wednesday at 10 a.m., these are all Pacific time, is my show, People Making Money. And then on Thursday at 5 p.m. is my show, Jiggers' Place, where we have a cocktail and a schmooze as we head into the end of the week. So I hope to see you again later this week. Again, thank you so much for joining me. Wishing you a wonderful rest of the day. And signing off as I always do. Marie, darling, you are my Belle. And I'm so grateful that although none of this was written down, that during the last year of your life, you gave me what was very much an oral, ethical will, memories of which I treasure to this very moment.